The profound and wondrous Dharma is rarely encountered even in 100 million kalpas. Having it to hear, accept, and maintain, may I taste the truth of the Tathagata's words. Good morning. This is the second Sunday talk of our Stone Creek Ongo, or Practice Intensive. Taking up the Eightfold Path. And in this talk, I'll be relating to the third and fourth folds, Skillful Speech and Skillful or Liberating Action. And these two folds, along with the fifth fold, Skillful Livelihood, which Yozen will talk about next week, along with Skillful Effort, are grouped together collectively as the Shila, or morality grouping, in terms of the threefold training of Shila, Samadhi, or meditation, and Prajna, or wisdom. And so Shila is translated as morality, ethics, virtue, discipline, code of conduct. It's often defined in terms of the precepts. And Shila is the second of the 6 paramitas also. And Shila is sometimes framed as the foundation for engaging in meditation and wisdom, like the basis, or the kind of the starting place. But we can also look at Shila as the fruit of meditation and wisdom. And so for me, the big question with these third and fourth folds is, how do we take care of our moral life? Or how do we take care of the precepts? How do we take care of liberating speech and liberating action? And kind of a broad point I want to offer behind the talk today is developing bridges, or a growing fluid sense of connection between the moral dimensions of our everyday actions and interactions on one hand, and on the other hand, the heart of our sitting practice, or investigating and opening the life of our true nature, or practicing awakening, practicing freedom. Or we could look at this in terms of, like, how does Zazen relate to our daily life? Or how does conventional truth relate to ultimate truth? Or how does ordinary stuff relate to something that's more expansive, liberating, or alive? I hear this in Dogen's emphasis on the oneness, and also resonating with Sando Kai, one of the poems that we chant, the harmony of difference and sameness, or the convening or coming together is San, and then Do and Kai of what we can distinguish, and then an inconceivable all-inclusiveness. The many and the one shaking hands. And in our practice, I feel like part of what we can attend to is actively caring for a sense of flow and circulation, or integration and reintegration, or a living balance, a balance that's always coming forth in new ways. And, I can become imbalanced by leaning too far one way or the other. So leaning too far over to the ordinary way of seeing and knowing my life, or conventional truth, I can be engaged but it can feel like an endless struggle. And I can make efforts to do good, but I might be caught by doing good, or, slip into like righteousness, or become rigid or close-minded. I might be helpful, but feel separate. Or, we can also see this, like, if I get involved with pity, pity that's looking down rather than compassion, which is intimate and open. And I also associate leaning over to this side with, burning out. There isn't something deeply sustaining unless we're kind of really attending to our spiritual life in the midst of these efforts to do good or be engaged. So I can try to help others, but be out of touch with myself, with my own truth, or ungrounded in my own truth, or ungrounded in self-study. And then this also leads us to, like, when we become certain, when we become right, we can, when we think we're right and we're doing good, we can also harm people. So you can check out, for each for ourselves, what are ways I can lean too far over into a graspable version of my life and my activity. And I can also become imbalanced by leaning too far over to ultimate truth, or an expansive freedom, or, and zazen. And so it can be free, but detached, letting go into kind of a personal release. Nourished by zazen, but in a way that's basically kind of out of touch, or kind of in my own little bubble. Or engaging spiritual truths, but in a way that bypasses the real issues of my life and how they can impact others. Or puffed up, when I feel like I'm doing some real important spiritual work. Getting to the heart of the great matter, but not knowing how to be kind. And so these different ways of leaning, we could feel maybe a tension, but we can care for both, and care for a sense of flow and connection, and realize a dynamic, active balancing. And then the liberating quality of practice can enliven and nourish and deepen our engagement in the ordinary affairs of life, and bring inquiry, endless inquiry, always opening new kinds of significance, always refining and broadening, and always showing us something new, something surprising about what it is to be alive right here. And kind of turning it around, my everyday efforts to be good or kind, to be decent, gracious, these ground or root the liberating quality of practice. They can test zazen, or test awakening, or make them real. And constantly exposing new points of grasping, new places I can get stuck. And also, everyday acts of goodness, these are accessible, these are concrete and doable. So, caring for this, a flowing connection, or a circulating back and forth, mutually embracing, mutually informing. Each provides a vital support for the other, and each can challenge the other. And challenges are opportunities to grow. That is one of the wonders of this practice, is to never stop growing. So I want to cultivate a freedom that uproots suffering, is also just more and more enthusiastic about engaging in this life with all the parts that I don't want. So an awakening that's kind of ready to embrace the uncomfortable questions or uncomfortable details of this life, of this person, or like a big mind that's wholehearted about small stuff without getting caught up in it. And I think we can also look at this in terms of how we engage the Eightfold Path, all eight folds, as a living organic whole. So that rather than looking at these eight folds as eight separate pieces of living, they're all like interconnected. They're all like feeding and flowing into each other. So there's like, liberating view, liberating intention or resolve, skillful speech, skillful action, skillful livelihood, skillful effort, liberating mindfulness, liberating concentration. All are vital to each other. And, in terms of this talk, all are vital to what I say and do. All are a single wheel of wholehearted practice. So, looking at skillful speech, there are many teachings on skillful speech. It seems like something the Buddha talked about quite a bit, or you could say it's like, among the people he was teaching, speech was like a big problem, or, it was where a lot of problems came up in the community and in relation to, monastic and lay and so on. So there's, in various lists of precepts, speech is often gets a lot of attention. In our 10 great precepts, like 3 or 4 are dedicated to speech. Speech is vital to how we share our lives, how we express ourselves, and also how we make a world together. Our speech and sometimes our silence is deeply impactful. And speech is I feel it as a multidimensional realm. And there can be skillfulness, unskillfulness, clarification, obscuration, harm, benefit, suffering, and liberation. The basic teachings on speech encourage us just to be honest and speak truth, to be kind and gentle, to abstain from divisive speech or speech that is hurtful to self or others, to be careful and intentional and avoid careless words. And that skillful speech comes from a caring heart or a mind of goodwill. And it's to benefit others. And we're encouraged to reflect before we speak. What are my intentions? What are my motivations? What is my state of mind? What is in my heart? What am I feeling? And also to carefully consider what impacts or consequences may unfold from what I am thinking of saying. So just a few, if we could, there's many instances probably we might be able to think of where we could have just paused for a second and wondered, what will be the consequences of this? We're also encouraged to continue reflecting while we're speaking, and to and adjusting, even in the midst of speech, with what we can see of the consequences of our own motivations, of the impact. And after we have spoken, continue reflecting, and where our speech has been unskillful, to be able to clearly acknowledge that. And make repairs if possible. And this clear acknowledgement could just be to ourselves, or we could offer it to Buddha, or we might even want to confess it out loud, either to one other person or many people. And that process of acknowledgement being part of a process of working with speech and transformation. The Buddha says that if there are words that are not factual or true, he doesn't speak them. And also he says, if they're not beneficial, he does not speak them. And he says, if they're true and beneficial words and welcome and agreeable to others, then he does say them. And if they're true and beneficial but disagreeable and not welcome to others, he takes into consideration the appropriate time to say them. And I appreciate that, that's from the Pali Canon. So very early in the tradition, this kind of clear acknowledgement that there are things that are true and beneficial, but also unwelcome, an unwelcome beneficial truth. And, to have a lot of care then about how you deliver that, how we challenge each other. Attending to the timing, and I guess I also think of context. What's the best context in which, to offer something challenging? Just last September, I gave a talk on skillful speech. And one of the things I explored there was deep listening as part of the practice of speech. And I think towards the end of the talk, I kind of offered that we could turn skillful speech as a skillful conversation. And skillful conversation for me can emphasize how my speech is always located, and it's always taking place in various contexts. And I feel this really speaks to what is actually skillful or what is liberating, as not being a kind of one-way delivery of a message, but a two-way meeting. A conversation, a turning together, which we engage in a kind of a reciprocity of listening and receiving and full self-expression. So kind of it's responsive. We're finding our life in and as interaction. Our daughter Kaya is learning how to drive. So far, Kaya's mostly been practicing with Sarah, with Dojin. But this past Tuesday, I went on my first venture with Kaya in the driver's seat. And she just was driving around. I was accompanying her on a few errands she had to do. And I wanted to offer it as a kind of opportunity to engage this path of skillful conversation.
So actually, before, part of the reason Sarah drives me with Kaya is because we've all talked about how I did not enjoy my experience of learning to drive. It was awful. I would say my experience, because my instructors were very tense, and I made me very tense, and that's kind of ruined driving for this lifetime so far. So on Tuesday, for me, on Tuesday, Kai got in the driver's seat and we're off. And it's like right away, it's really rough. There's like this like a terrifying acceleration right out of our driveway. And then a fairly sudden braking and right into the lane of opposite traffic where the cars are coming at us like, way over to the shoulder. And
she's really a good driver, right?
And so I'm trying to be in touch. I'm trying to be in touch with myself. I'm trying to be in touch with my stuff from my past and what I received. And like, is that what I want to pass on? And I'm also in touch with the fact that I think I'm somewhat legitimately scared for my well-being. And like, what can I offer? What can I offer Kaya now that would be helpful? And it continues to be pretty like, like lurching and sudden braking, and I'm getting car sick actually after about 2 minutes. But Kai and I were staying in touch, and Kai is apologizing, and then she tells me she's feeling nervous because she feels like I'm feeling, and then this is actually making her drive much worse and much more kind of unsmooth way. And I can acknowledge I am nervous. I have fear, and encourage us both to relax, and that we're here practicing driving together, doing our best. And and when we're not in the driver's seat and things are difficult in the car, that can show us things about ourselves. And I could feel a paradigm of what I experienced in the past. I think a paradigm of fear and manifest in this position of not being in the driver's seat, which would then came out as this a stressful attempt to control what is happening from the passenger seat through speech, through unskillful speech. And so when I can acknowledge this and see this is the template I was experienced. I came into driving in this kind of environment. But if I can be in touch with that, I don't have to, it frees me from having to take such a controlling or dominating approach myself in the present. And so as I got out of the car, felt a bit shaken with fear and a bit nauseous, but I also felt, well, this was really different from what I experienced in learning to drive. And I'm grateful for how it's different, and grateful for my relationship with my daughter, and also grateful to have survived. With our son, Loka, sometimes when we wake up in the morning, he comes in our bed and we play what we call bunnies. And this involves all sorts of scenarios with stuffed animals. And usually, we take up talking for the stuffed animals. And there's like voices, and there's like a grumpy old man duck. And there's an octopus with a French accent. There's a dopey penguin. There's a platypus named Phaphilia RV. It's one of Loki's more original names. There's a ferret named James. So there's many bunnies. In this play, I more and more, I've kind of learned, just try to let Loka lead the way. And so I try to play along without introducing major shifts in the action. And for a while, I tried to move towards like resolving problems, and for a while I was putting out fires. But then I realized that the car or the plane or the house being on fire was not something Loka was interested in resolving as part of the play. The burning car was just like or the truck or the house or the spaceship. It was just part of what was happening for him. It was just like an ongoing state of affairs. And I was like, okay, this is what it is. Stop trying to put out the fires. Another thing that's happened recently is sometimes like we'll be playing and then he just becomes very still and quiet. And here I'm kind of feeling like my impulse to fill that space and just saying like, no, or just like, just be quiet. Just let him have this space and let him have his process. And so, then like after 1 minute or 2 minutes, sometimes it's even been like 5 minutes, he's just like still and quiet. He just pops right back and we're like right back where we were in the scenario. I have no idea what is happening in these little quiet moments. In case 14 of the Blue Cliff record, a monk asked Yunmen, what is the teaching of a whole lifetime? And Yunmen said, an appropriate statement. And so this phrase, an appropriate statement, it consists of 3 characters. And the first means meeting, or facing, or responding. And the second is simply the character for one. And then the third is speech, talk, or statement. So an appropriate statement is a statement or expression that is like meeting or facing or responding to just one person, one circumstance, one moment. It's arising with what it's meeting. It's arising from being wholeheartedly here. It's arising from showing up fully. And so it's not coming to the situation with all the answers. An appropriate response is not something we know beforehand. It arises from being a student of the conversation. And every meeting is a novel event in the universe. Dogen says, in regard to the skillful speech pathlim, a mute is not a mute to the mute. I don't know what Dogen means. But what came up for me is empty people can use empty words to have a liberating conversation. And we're not awakened through grasping speech. But speech can be a medium of a conversation of awakening. An appropriate response is not trying to be more real or more true than simply, like what is apropos? A meeting to, what is meeting this one? What is meeting just this? It's just for this conversation. Turning to skillful or liberating action, this is usually defined pretty simply in terms of following the precepts pertaining to bodily conduct. So not killing, not taking what is not given, not stealing, not misusing sexuality, and sometimes also not getting intoxicated. And in this context of action, I wanna once again kind of invoke a spirit of conversation and appreciate how action is always located and unfolding in contexts. And so our receptivity, our listening, our view, and also our intention, our values, and what we love, and who we are with, attending to how we are variously located in terms of gender, race, age, and so on, and how there's a history to each of those, and how that can impact what's happening, what we see and experience, and what we do. All this is all part of skillful or liberating action. And I wanted to find a word, so if speech is the conversation, action is to what? And I can't think of a word, and so I made up a word, conversaction. Well, maybe interaction. Maybe interaction. Oh yeah, okay. Let's just go with interaction.
Sorry.
Skillful interaction. Skillful interaction would be, skillful liberating action as appropriate, as intimate response, located, contextualized, arising and meeting what's happening, and placed in conversation, and ongoing. And so it doesn't just go out. There's feedback. We're interested in the impact, and there's always a two-way street. In Genjo Koan, Dogen talks about the fish swimming in the water and the bird flying in the sky. And he says, if the fish or the bird tries to go beyond the water or the air, they get lost. The bird and the fish realize, or Genjo, the koan, they realize the koan, the point of liberation, when they find their place where they are and find their way in this moment. If I try to abstract myself from what's happening here, I get lost. So skillful action or interaction always arising with the nonstop inquiry into what's happening in the present moment and rooting our offering in meeting this. We can develop an appreciation for how we are placed and how we are conditioned, and how our conditioning is impacting us here. That with when I was in the car with Kaya, being in touch with my conditioning, how I was located in that car by that, but not confined in it. Dogen says, when Dharma fills your body and mind, you understand that something is missing. And so part of being located is appreciating how we're conditioned and how we are limited. But there's an opening there. Like Dogen said last week, having a view with it. And this is part of why I tend to not use the word right in talking about these folds or limbs of the path as a translation of sama or samyak. Because for me, I when I hear right action, I hear something kind of dualistic or reified or uncreative. And somehow something for me that obscures this appropriate response, appropriate to what's happening, appropriate to who I am. That skillful action or liberating action is imbued with the life of this moment. Engaging imagination. And, unique and particular to who I am, who I'm with. So this appropriate response it's a completely relational situation. And I feel this kind of resonating with what I talked about last month, this story of Dogen always pouring back half a dipper of water into the river. So this is this kind of reciprocity. And kind of reciprocity it's not really right or wrong. But for Dogen, it was appropriate to who he was and what water and the river was for him. Loka has this set of blocks, we call them marble blocks. They probably have other names. They're blocks, wooden blocks with holes in them. And some of them are kind of straight through, some of them curve a little bit. And the idea is you can build things, building towers and buildings. And then if you plan it right, you can roll marbles through the buildings in these various ways. And a few days ago, Loka was super excited and happy to show me that he'd succeeded in making a structure which had this marble jump, so their marbles would be on those one structure on the table that the marbles were shooting out of and then landing in another structure on a chair. And he was pretty happy about this. And then I'm in the kitchen, and a few minutes later, I hear him cry out, "I hate everything!" And he was upset because it had stopped working. The marbles weren't shooting out right anymore. And the thing about the marble blocks is that every time a marble runs through the blocks, it changes the blocks. Just a little bit, or sometimes a lot. And so the next time the marble goes through, it's a little different how it goes through. And if the structure involves if the scenario involves a fairly precise placement of blocks, pretty soon it stops working. And I feel like this speaks to interaction, skillful interaction, appropriate response. That what we do in one moment changes the world a little bit. And that change changes us a little bit, and so on. And so what we did yesterday might have been appropriate and skillful yesterday, but things are not exactly the same. And so it may or may not be skillful. It may or may not work today. There isn't necessarily a formula we can stick to. And that's part of this idea of conversation and turning together and, being in the midst of everything shifting with a sense of inquiry. There's an 18th century Soto Zen teacher named Katsudo Honko. And he wrote commentaries on Dogen's Shobogenzo essays. They were commentaries, they were 4 characters long for each fascicle. Very short commentaries. And so Dogen has a writing on the Bodhisattva's 4 methods of guidance, which intertwine with the Eightfold Path in some ways. The 4 methods of guidance are giving, kind speech, beneficial action, and cooperation. And Honko's commentary is overthrowing all routine. So overthrowing all routine. And so I hear this as this never-ending path of living inquiry into what is skillful and liberating. So I hope these reflections on the speech and action folds of the Eightfold Path gives some sense of what I was talking about at the beginning, of a kind of connection or circulation among the eightfolds of the path. And in a more basic sense, a kind of a circulation or reciprocal enlivening, between the ordinary daily acts and zazen, or, ethical, moral involvement and clarifying true nature. And always working towards a deeper and more alive and more inclusive or embracing integration. All right. Thank you very much. Are there any expressions, questions, comments?
Charlie, I really enjoyed your speech, your talk, and especially sharing the trials of driving. It's been very challenging. Real life Zen in action. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you. Actually, Sarah went down with Kaya to take her to work, and when Sarah was a little bit late, I actually wondered if Kaya might have gotten into a more of an interesting adventure.
I should give a talk about my experience. It's kind of different. Kaya's a pretty good driver for a learning driver. It's a different field of interaction. Just in case you see us on the road, don't be afraid.
Hey, one thing you probably haven't experienced is when you were teaching the driving, you probably had an automatic. My experience was with my two girls was a clutch, and it was a different experience.
Yes, we have an automatic, and actually learning to drive a clutch was part of the trauma of my instructional experiences.
And we got a great abandoned lot for you to practice on, where we taught our kids. No danger of crashing into anything.
Yeah, there was some practicing in parking lots, and then there was going out on the road. And then I think actually part of the problem also, Kaya had gotten a little bit rusty by the time we went out together, so it had been a few weeks. For the sake of all beings, she will learn how to drive better.
Korin, thank you for your talk. I can't help but add an anecdote of my mother's right speech when I was learning to drive. We were going around a cul-de-sac, and I meant to hit the brake because I was going a little too fast, but instead I hit the accelerator and I jumped over the curb, missed the guy's mailbox by about a half an inch, and landed squarely in his yard. And my mother said pretty calmly, "Back up the car and drive home. Your mother needs a scotch." So that I thought that was right speech. And I have a question for you. I think it was Aristotle who said that virtue is a habit. And I think there's some truth to that. I think there's a limitation to it, but I think it's a helpful container. Let's put it that way, for the worst that humans are capable of. So I wonder if you would comment on that with overthrow all routine. Like there's some kind of juxtaposition of the discipline of our practice, let's say, and not becoming encased in it, I guess.
Yeah, I have not spent a lot of time studying Aristotle's teachings on ethics. Because what I find myself wondering about that, which I just don't know, is like is virtue a habit? Well, we could have a habit of inquiry and a habit of not knowing and a habit of, we could have habits like that. and so I wonder if those are the kind of habits he's talking about. Because I feel like there is a kind of, we can form, that we can cultivate virtues that help us meet each situation. And those, we could think of those as habits that we want to become really deep and habitually being in touch with our heart and habitually noticing when it's open or closed, habitually noticing like our condition impacting us and how, and making it a habit of noticing, things like racial difference and racial composition of the room and how it's impacting your interactions. Things like, all these things I think could become kind of like habits, So I don't know if that answers your question. How does that sound?
No, I think that's good. It seems to me that, there's a certain habit or routine that you could say around showing up for Zazen, right? But then that just gets you in the door. It doesn't create being wholehearted.
Mm-hmm.
That actually is beyond habit. You actually have to show up and risk something, if you know what I mean. But the habit can actually open a door for you.
Yeah.
Be there otherwise.
Yeah. I resonate with that too.
Thank you.
Thanks. I think Hanko was saying that, and then I think he was not thinking that that the monastics where he was teaching would stop their training program for even one day. So I think they had to somehow deal with that saying while following the routine, the monastic routine, without fail.
I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
That is, I always struggle with right speech ever since I was, little, and try not to say things that are inappropriate. And I feel like since my Zen practice has been going on, I've kind of gotten better at that. But okay, so the guy next door has parked a giant dumpster in his driveway, and it's really ugly. And you're sort of thinking, well, I shouldn't say anything about this to the neighbors or, da. But I can come in and say stuff to Richard that is not kind speech, right? Mm. And my question is, if I can't, we sort of go, okay, anything that we say doesn't go beyond these doors. Mm. And that's good, because I find that if I tried to be like good speech all the time, I'd be sort of a wreck. Because I'd be repressing stuff all the time. So is it an okay practice to let it out in my home, or what do you do about that?
I think that's part of a kind of a good, healthy part of a solid relationship, and that because you can you know, when you say something to your partner, they can hold it and take care of it for you and not spread it around, because that would hurt you and others. And I also feel like, you know, sometimes we don't always feel like we're confessing, but almost everything we say, we could also look at it as confession, you know, and it's sort of like, you know, it can be healthy to confess, you know, like, we don't have to say the words "I confess," but just like blah blah blah, and it's a confession, and you can acknowledge it, and you acknowledging it with the light of your partner, I think can be, you know, pretty healthy and wholesome. I think there should be a thing to watch out for is if you put out something unwholesome and then your partner's like, yeah. And then like you get really
we're not wholesome at our house then.
as opposed to like, you know, like if I feel like, you know, when Dojin and I say something to each other that's not so skillful, we're kind of like holding it for the other person, like, oh, yeah, now you confess that, you know, and not letting it kind of like impact our opinions or views, like, you know, like we like knowing like this is just this person's experience, you know. I don't this anyway, that's what comes up for me. But I feel like it is a part of, I think it can be fine and healthy, and also part of Doksan relationships and so on, you know. I mean, you know, holding confession is something that, you know, priests do in various cultural contexts, and it's you know, it can be really appropriate.
Thank you.
Get
that dumpster.
Can I ask you, Dogen had the forgiving kind speech. What were the other two?
Beneficial action. And then the last one was it's cooperation, or sometimes also translated as identity action.
Thank you so much for this talk today. I struggle with, and I don't know, maybe you said this a number of weeks ago, knowledge talks, wisdom listens. And I find that in my business, I have a lot of knowledge, but the key thing for me is to listen to people. So every day I have to say, first and always, I listen. And, you know, because, and the whole idea of overthrowing routine and then what skillful activity today may not be appropriate tomorrow. By listening to another person, it's really liberating if you can get there, because you understand so much more about that person, what their intentions are, and it's not something that goes on. This is an eternal, you know, this is a stoicism that I'm always working hard at. I mean, I don't know if it's hard at, but I just have to catch myself on sometimes a minute by minute basis. And this was such a great talk on this matter today. Thank you.
Oh, good. Yeah, it's great. It's great practice.
Hi.
Hey.
Hi, I'm sort of new to you, but I live in Santa Rosa and I've been following on YouTube for a while, and I'm an old Berkeley Zen Center person. And anyway, I've been struggling with kind speech for as long as I've been conscious. I mean to be, my intention is to be kind, but somewhere along the line, I think from, you know, kind of a critical parent, I started to be honest too often and speak my honesty, which has been difficult for me all my life and harmful to others and harmful in my own life. And I have been really working on it for 40 years of Zen practice, as well as my own psychological learnings. But it still just is really rough for me to take that pause, even though my intention is positive. And this is still happening in my early 70s. And, I'm still working on it. So just a comment. And thank you for your comment.
Thank you. Thank you. I wish you well with it. What's the water session?
Can I share?
Yes.
I'm sorry. It just made me think of a story that I heard a story once that a monk who lived I think in Thailand and so lived in a little kuti by themselves, and they were doing fine with right speech when they were alone in their little hut, but when they walked into town, they filled their mouth with water and kept the water in their mouth, so that if anyone came and spoke to them, they had to take a minute to either swallow or the water. And it was like a physical reminder of taking the pause. And I often, for myself, it's been, once I heard that story, it became like a image that comes to mind. So often when somebody brings something and I can feel myself getting reactive, I picture myself swishing water. and then it gives, and it's an emblem of like, hold on a sec, wait a minute. So I just wanted to offer that. Sorry. In case it's useful. In case you're a good person.
Dogen's practicing when you start seeing those
My cheeks
moving. All right. Well, let's do our closing chat. Thank you, everyone. Okay, it's in the chat. For great bodhisattva vows, beings are numberless. I vow to free them. Delusions are inexhaustible. I vow to end them. Dharma gates are infinite. I vow to enter them. The Buddha way is boundless. I vow to realize it.